All right, let me first start by sharing the screen. We have to get to the right place there. Let's see. There we go. hmm All right, almost there. Okay, so um, this is the third class in the series of four on karma and emptiness. So that's why we have the opening screen telling us that. So we'll try to wrap it up by 8:30. There's a lot to cover tonight as I delved into trying to clarify some things that have come up via questions from the first two sessions, and then also some email exchanges I've had with individual people. I realize that for some of us, maybe we don't need a lot of what I'm covering. Um, Especially if you're really experienced in meditation on emptiness. But the framing that we're doing as it relates to the Four Noble Truths, the Wheel of Life, specifically the 12 links of dependent origination, and how we use emptiness meditation to break the 12 links of dependent origination that keep us in suffering existence. So we always want to keep that in our minds. Still, with that said, some of the questions that have come up have me wanting to spend extra time on some of the most important foundational principles that one has to really have clear in one's mind. Or I hate to say it, the meditations that one could go through the motions of in terms of doing the prescriptive antidotes that we've talked about, namely the specific reason uh, based analytical meditations on the ultimate, like sevenfold reasoning and diamond slivers and dependent arising. Mm, this is where people might get into trouble and not have clarity and therefore not make progress with where those meditations are intended to take us. So, I'm going to try to spend a little bit more time on some foundational principles, a lot of which I covered last session. With that said, remember what we're doing in this course. I alluded to it already, but it's up there on the screen again. Um, and we do want to get to um, the last bullet point as much as we can in the limited time of these four sessions. Four sessions of an hour and a half each seem like a long time, but as I think I said in passing during our last session, this topic could be covered in a class like every 2 weeks for years. No exaggeration. Um, so we have to stay somewhere in the neighborhood of the 30,000 foot view because going too deep is not allowed because of time constraints, but yet I want to give us a taste of that. So I do want to get to some tasting of the prescriptive meditation practices, and we will. And I'll effort to get there as quick as possible. But there are some principles that we do need to, these are the meditations that I was just alluding to, which we've looked at and talked about before. This is redundant in terms of what is being shown on the screen. I showed this last session. Um, so we're going to actually, with all that said, we're going to skip the objects negated by the path and objects negated by reasoning. If any of you really need clarification on that, we'll go back to it. But I want to actually go into um, this idea, the two kinds of self. So there's the self that is negated, inherently existent self. And then a self that exists, that's the self that is merely designated by term or name. and concept. And we've talked a lot about this over the last two sessions in terms of what that really means. This is the um, important aspect that needs to be kept in mind when we're doing emptiness meditation, so that we go straight down the intended path, uh, meaning the Buddha's intended path, which is traveling the middle way, avoiding the extremes of nihilism and absolutism. So, very, very important to, even if you don't fully understand the self that exists, then this is important to know that there are these two kinds of self. So, when one might be doing like a meditation on emptiness, like I have John there on the screen, so that's myself. So we're merely designated John is the basis of designation. More specifically, it's the aggregates that make up John. So remember that. I'll try to bring it up a few more times as we go through this evening, but the basis of designation, there has to be something that I'm designating John to. And when we talk about self, it's the basis of designation is the aggregates. And we'll talk about what those aggregates are as we move along here. So this is important to remember. So John, merely designated John, is the basis of designation. It says merely designated because merely is the way that John exists nominally, merely by being designated, arising on the basis of the aggregates. And then, again, what we're talking about here is trying to to move our way into understanding the two kinds of self. So that's related to the second one. That statement, merely designated John, is the basis of designation. And inherently existing John is the object of negation. That's related to the first one, the self that is negated, the self that doesn't exist. So the merely designated John and John's emptiness of inherent existence, which is what is discovered through these meditation practices where we negate that object that we call inherently existent. Those two, the merely designated John, merely designated, and John's emptiness of inherent existence, not inherent existent John, but the emptiness discovered through these meditations, where we negate inherent existence. Both exist. They depend on each other. One cannot exist without the other. I talked about this a bit last time. A few questions came up regarding this as well. That the appearance of an inherent existing person exists, but an inherently existing person does not. That's why I put appearance in bold. There's a difference. Appearance of an inherently existing person and an inherently existing person are not the same thing. Important to keep that in mind. So, continuing with analyzing John, John thinks of himself. As he does, what arises is the appearance of an inherently existing person. And then in all caps, I put there appears. It appears to the consciousness, apprehending him or I, John. John holds that appearing inherent existing person in his mind and analyzes whether he exists inherently or not. And then here we're basically talking about the very primer, very basics of like what we're talking about when we do meditation on emptiness. So this is what we're analyzing when we're able to have that inherently existing person appear to the consciousness. then we are trying to hold that in our mind and using the analysis that's present in the various reasoning meditations to cook it, to focus on it with serenity, as Jason Kappa calls it, or single pointed concentration. We analyze it, we put it under the microscope. And over time, as we utilize these meditations, we gain a direct realization of emptiness of the I, the appearance of an inherently existing self subsides while John is meditating over and over. It just naturally subsides. And this can only be done. The point being made here now on the visual on the screen is that can only be done with a mind of meditative equipoise. So this is like why we need to not just learn these topics, but we need to reflect on them and we need to actually learn how to do the actual meditations and do meditation well. There's all kinds of training on how to do meditation well, where we learn how to combine serenity and insight meditation, shamatha and insight, single pointed concentration, and analytical meditation, in this case, using the reasoning, analyzing the ultimate. But when we do that, it's important to know that we're not wiping everything out. What is the something that remains? There is something that remains. This is so, so important, and it relates back to this, a self that is merely designated by term and concept. Get used to that kind of wording. What remains is the mere I. That's how we talk about it as Prasangika Mahayamika practitioners. Existing by mere designation, by mere name, dependently arising with an object. So this is very, very important. So as we do these kind of meditations and that self-grasping appearance of inherent existence that we label everything with subsides, we can then start to untangle it from the mere I. We don't see the mere I in that kind of meditation, but it's what is remains. And we'll talk a little bit more about like how one experiences that in and outside of meditation. We already talked about it a little bit. So as remember, I said that that kind of subsiding happens when you're in meditative equipoise. Um, so to that mind, um, no person remains. We're talking about while you're in meditative equipoise. But that's something that remains when one then is no longer in meditative equipoise, is the mere I that does exist by mere designation. Um, and so um, when you're out of meditative equipoise, that I, that's the I that appears. It exists. It just doesn't inherently exist. And the more you refine your meditation on emptiness, the more you can differentiate the two. It's very, very important to learn that because that is part of what helps you to stay focused properly on what you're actually meditating on in emptiness, which is the object of negation. And you can't miss that, or you're going to miss the whole thing. That's why I'm spending more time on this. Um, so, but for someone who does meditative practices over and over and over and has that subsiding of the inherent existent that we, as I said, we placed on all objects that we meditate on, and then it subsides. And even when we're off of the meditation cushion, outside of meditative equipoise, we start to know with clarity, even while we're experiencing things as merely existing, um, we start to see the mistake that we have been making all this time of labeling things as inherently self-existent. And that is called by the masters seeing both samsara and nirvana, all of existence, like an illusion. That's how it is. It's not that it's an illusion, meaning it doesn't exist. A lot of people make that mistake. Do not make that mistake. It's like an illusion, meaning it doesn't inherently exist. And there's a change in your mind. It's visceral, it's experiential, it's called a realization. So the inherent existent I that John grasps is itself the object of negation. So the problem that I'm dancing around here over the last couple of minutes is that those two that I identified up here and listed at the top of this page of the two kinds of self, the self that's negated and the self that exists, when we do emptiness meditations, it's very, very common to have that them to mix them up, to tangle them together. This is where we don't follow the middle way. This is where we fall to lean towards or fall completely towards nihilism or absolutism. Most of us are living constantly in a state of absolutism because we are not, we're uh, experiencing everything in that mistaken way. So the statement here on the screen, knowing this on an intellectual level is not enough. That's why we have to learn these meditations. I'm trying to provide you with a view, a lens to look at, like, well, why do we do these meditations? And then looking all the way back to the Four Noble Truths, the Wheel of Life, especially the 12 dependent links, we can start to see that this is directly tackling the mistaken view, which is the first link, ignorance, which leads to karmic formations. So it's all connected. But knowing it intellectually is not enough. It will slip away. You will not be able to even hold it in your mind. Mistakenly experiencing things as inherently existent is a habit that each sentient being has had since beginningless time. So it's a delicate venture, meaning the process of discovering that and clearly being clear about the two selves, the one that doesn't exist, the one that does exist, how when you do emptiness meditation, you do not want to confuse them. So knowing the two selves is really important. I think that's pretty clear. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating a little bit of what we talked about over the first two sessions, but again, we're trying to break the habit of the mistaken view. So next, we want to talk for a minute about a couple of minutes about the mere I. So here, we need to be clear that the mere I, when we talk about that, because remember, that's the one that is the existent self. When we do that, we have to know what we're talking about on another level. So here there are two I's when we talk about identifying the mere I a little bit more with refinement and detail and specificity. Um, there's the general I. The general I you can think of as the I that includes all of your um, ordinary existences, meaning birth within samsara, within the six realms since beginningless time. Maybe human, maybe animal, maybe um, one of the higher realms, all the way up to the formless realm. So you could think of that in that way, the general I. And then the general I, you could also think of as being a part, P-A-R-T, possessor. What are the parts that it's possessing? Its parts refer to the particular I's. These are actual just instances that are included every passing moment within the general I. And that could be as long as an entire lifetime, represented by the 12 links in their totality in terms of a cycle. They could represent something much shorter. They could represent the particular eyes all the way down to like microscopic, almost imperceptible moments by moment. They're all particular eyes that are connected, possessed, part possessed, if you will, P-A-R-T, by the general eye. So this is something you need to understand clearly. So just think of the general eye as being the eye that has that is what is part of your continuum. Each individual has a general eye that is its continuum since beginningless time. The particular eyes, or the part eyes, are individual instances that occur within that general eye continuum. It's not really that complicated, but we need to stop and think about and frame and understand correctly where we're going with this. Understanding the general eye and the particular eyes will lead us to seeing clearly what the mere eye is, which is the way we nominally say we exist as Prasangika Mahayamikans. So then this is what we're talking about here. Um, then I had a note here. So yeah, so here I want to just say a few more comments about the general eye. It has other characteristics. The most important thing is that it's impermanent. So this is not like other systems where there is an I or something that is at our essence that is permanent. So it's not like a soul. It's not like what even some of the other Buddhist schools identify as something that is tangible and is there and is permanent. So the general I, again, we're speaking as Prasangika Mahayamika's philosophy here, is impermanent. So that's really important. So it changes. If it's impermanent, it changes moment by moment. It doesn't inherently self-exist. The Mahayamika Prasangika view says nothing inherently self-exists. Does a Buddha inherently self-exist? Does the path inherently self-exist? The Buddhist path. Does Dharma inherently self-exist? You can ask the question on any object that you could put in your mind. And all the way to looking at ourselves. We cannot make the mistake that we think there's some part of us that inherently exists that is permanent. It, it, the general I, changes over many lifetimes. If it didn't, it couldn't um, become enlightened. You couldn't become enlightened. We'll talk more about that as we move on. So the general I is simply designated, this is the punchline, designated independence on the entire continuum that is known by name as the general I. And so this is something that you got to be very clear on. And then when we talk about the specific eyes, we can't hold the particular eyes. We can't think of all of them as being inherently one. Every single moment that occurs within the general I, our eyes, if you will, that are individual and are not the same because they're each impermanent. They're each lacking inherent self-existence. They are not fixed. They do not stand on their own. They only also arise independence on it, and then also in connection to the general I continuum, which is how karma can move in connection with a specific continuum of a self. So John is different than Chappelle and different than Georgine and different than Kim, etc. So otherwise we could experience each other's karma. In individual lifetimes, if they were inherently self-existent, once they end it, they wouldn't carry anything forward, necessarily in connection with um, something called karma that is carried by who? So it's kind of important to know that even though they're impermanent, they do have the ability to carry karma, which will be the next thing that we do talk about. Um, and then hopefully that makes things a little clearer. Um, but that, don't be afraid to think of that, because once you get used to understanding the mere I or the mere nominal existent of things as the one side of the coin, the other side of the coin being its ultimate nature, which is empty, then there's nothing to be afraid of. You then can start to develop clarity of like what the middle way actually is. And there's no way you could fall towards extremity of nihilism or absolutism. So then this is kind of an important point. Mhm. See if I don't want to leave anything out. Yeah. So just to summarize that, talk about the I, regarding the specific eyes and the general eyes. I think I said this clearly, but they all pertain to one continuum. Like I said, the names of some people just now, Kim and Georgine and myself, and we all have our own general I in particular or specific eyes within our own continuum. We exist merely by this mere I. So this is something to get some clarity on. Um, mhm. Skipping a lot of things because of time. So when it's said, I just brought up karma quickly, and we're going to talk about that next in terms of the sort of $64 million question, which is like who carries or what carries karmic seeds or karmic formations, because that becomes a real question for a lot of people when they're wrestling with emptiness and if there's no inherent self-existent self, where does karma reside? So we're going to talk about that. Um, so when it's said that a person creates karma and the person experiences the results, this definitely refers to the general I of the continuum. So put that in your mind. That's the I that has always been since beginningless time, your continuum. Um, and that continuum exists at the time of creating the karma and at the time of experiencing the results. So if you know anything about cause and effect, and once you start to do emptiness meditation, you start to do the analysis that shows that if something inherently self-exists, it cannot exist at the same time, meaning in the form of an effect and in the form of its cause and effect at the same time. So it's one of the meditations that help bolster understanding that a continuum, like a general I, can carry cause and effect, and that they are different that it is always changing. It underlines and underscores how this I is impermanent, lacks inherent self-existence. But it is there. There is a mere I. It's not like you're negating the I when we do these meditations. So this is important. So it's possible that you can also see this when just looking at a particular lifetime. So the particular eyes, that cause and effect can occur within the general continuum that those particular eyes are part of as you move along, and how they can both, they don't contradict each other, they don't negate each other. Um, so they're both occurrences that occur across the general continuum of I and the particular moments of I within that general continuum. They both can carry karma, cause and effect. It's a consciousness that can do that. So this is something else to understand. And then you see I put up there on the screen time of death. That's like a little scary. But at death, the self of this life disappears. It doesn't go to the next life, nor does it go to Buddhahood. Neither way. The person who comes from a previous life and goes on to Buddhahood is the general I, not the self, the specific I of this lifetime, not the John of this lifetime. So this is underscoring that it's that continuum of the general I that's been here since the beginning of this time that is what will proceed on the path that we're on in our Buddhist practice, eventually to Buddhahood. The specific I that exists only in this life is literally the maturation of karma, whether it's like in one of the realms, hungry ghost realms, animal realms, human realm. That specific I or particular I ends with the exhaustion of the maturation karma, of the karma that carried you into this life and carried you through this life, that caused the particular rebirth that you had. Um, and when it's finished, that's the definition of death. There's no more energy that the particular I can grasp onto. And that's key to like where we want to go here. So now um, we want to understand um, a little bit more clearly. Find my notes here. Um, Let me go to this note. I'm skipping because I could spend all 20 hours on this. So so please apologies. Um, so here we talk about uh, the mere I, that it is designated independence on when we talk about like the mere I as we conventionally experience it. I just tried to share with you how the mere I is present in the general continuum because it's impermanent, and it can carry that mere I. The mere I is also designated independence on the collection of a body and a mind, the coarse level mind. The general I, in Tantra, we call it the subtle or most subtle body and mind. And that's synonymous or code for the general I. And so, but we also have a collection of on a course level, a body and mind, and that's what we see manifested in a rebirth. So whether it's human or some other, uh, a rising rebirth in the six realms of existence. Um, so then it's important not to think that the mere I is exclusive to the general I. And there's not really a dichotomy there. We only talk about it in this way so you understand that moments from an entire lifetime. that we know as a lifetime in samsaric existence, all the way down to the microscopic passing of tiny, almost not traceable moments, are individual moments of I. Um, and it in total, as those are part possessed by the general I or the subtle body and mind, they are all they both carry karma. The type of karma they carry different are it's very different in terms of the course level, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So it's kind of important to get a, even if it's the first time you're hearing, if you already know this, great. And if it's first time you're hearing it, then hopefully you can hold on to it a bit. But the big point is, as I put up on the screen, is that since the general I and in the particular or individual moments of I are not permanent, not an inherently existent basis of designation, the I designated independence on it isn't permanent or inherently existent. So, as I put here in bold, the continuum of the subtle mind and wind, that's the general I, like all other phenomena, is empty of inherent existence, yet exists conventionally, dependent arising. So, this is important. There's another mention here that I could talk about at the time of death, but we'll skip that. So, but it's important to try to understand this. I brought up I'm going to bring up a an analogy to a yogini in meditative equipoise, seeing emptiness directly. So at that time, a yogini has no thought. They don't say, she doesn't say, I am in meditative equipoise. I am perceiving emptiness. In meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness, only emptiness appears to the mind, no other object, including a sense of self, does not appear. And emptiness is perceived, non-dual. So this is important. But once the meditative equipoise experience is completed and one, if you will, descends out of that, then one does um, experience the mere I arising conventionally. So by doing this kind of practice, where we analyze and bring that in the nature of self or phenomena as and investigating whether or not it has inherent self-existence, um, and discovering that it doesn't, and then we move all the way to the point of being able to do in meditative equipoise, see it directly. When we come out of that, it affirms directly the mere arising that happens conventionally. And so one does help the other in terms of them both, as I started the talk this evening, as both being dependent on each other. One cannot exist without the other. So this is important. And it also clarifies what middle way really means. And that's really, really important. So if you have any questions, you can kind of hold them. I want to get through at least this who or what carries karmic seeds. So on the screen, I took a picture. It's pretty poor. I apologize. Um, but this comes from a book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where he just, it's a chart about the tenet systems of what they assert is a person. And I'm not going to go through them. That's a whole course. And sometimes can get a little bit really academic. But suffice to say that all of these systems, if we go from non-Buddhist systems all the way through these Buddhist systems, all the way through to the Mahayamika, which is three forms of Mahayamika, Yogacara Svatantrika and Sautantrika Svatantrika Mahayamika, and then Prasangika Mahayamika. all the way up to Svatantrika, Svatantrika, Mahyamika, the one right before the end. Suffice to say, for this evening, so we don't get bogged down in these, they all contend that um, there's some permanent I, some inherent self-existent I, either of self or phenomena. And so Prasangika argument, refutation of what is the usually the object of all these emptiness meditations. It's called, reasoning that analyzes the ultimate and it utilizes refutation as the way, and also syllogisms. Then it's basically saying that this is not possible. There cannot be a permanent I of any kind, no matter how you contort and structure it, because as soon as you have something that's permanent, then it's incapable of changing. And this is a problem. Dependent arising doesn't work. Karma doesn't work. Not the way that we believe as Prasangikas it should. So Prasangikas say that view says that the way a person exists is the mere I, what I just talked about. And so here, in a system of self and the aggregates, we kind of know them as the appropriator, meaning a self, and the appropriated, the aggregates. It's the self-designated independence on these aggregates. That's all it is. Moment by moment, particular eyes dependently arising. That's it. That's the mere nominal existence that we're talking about. There's, it doesn't have to be inherent self-existence. Then you're talking about a permanent self-sufficient that doesn't depend on anything, causes and conditions and results that they wouldn't exist. And we can see as responsible minds that have the ability to properly cognize things, that that's just not the case. Cause and effect is pervasive everywhere. There's no exception. Just like inherent existence, the lack of that is not universal except for like the mind or a foundational consciousness, etc. Everything just moment by moment dependently arises. And so so therefore the I exists by mere name. That's what we say. Still might feel a little fuzzy and to you, but like, I'm trying to get you used to it. So it's by merely being designated. Let's see. Mhm. So in the chat, I'll just read a comment from Linda. From a Mahayamika perspective, would it be fair to say impermanence is permanent and I, or emptiness, meaning ever permanent yet still empty of inherent existence, always changing? Maybe it's a word problem, same as bodhicitta. So mm, I can't say without pondering it the way I think your mind is framing the way you're asking this, Linda, but um, something that dependently arises um, and changes by nature lacks permanence. So we commonly say in Buddhist philosophy that means it has a characteristic of impermanence. But as we talk about a mere I that's always existed since beginningless time in a continuum, of the same continuum that's part possesses particular or part eyes, then I think you can kind of look at it the way you're looking at it. But if you get too stuck on the word permanent within the context of Buddhist philosophy, you then start to make the mistake that it exists on its own, which I know you're not doing because I could reading the way you frame this. So it's always has the potential to be a word problem. And some of these kinds of things, like the thing you're bringing up, are what get debated on the debate grounds and get clarified. So that's the best I can answer that for now. I would just say, word to the wise is to try to be very mindful and aware not to associate that concept you were just sharing with us as that idea of permanent um, with something that inherently self-exists and doesn't dependently arise, then this becomes a real problem. Um, so hopefully that helps a little bit in terms of how I'm answering that. Um, so here, mere does not refute the basis of designation, meaning the aggregates of the self or the conventional self. It precludes the inherent existence of the self. So here I'm trying to get you comfortable with understanding how something can inherently not exist, but exist by mere name and concept. And if you've never talked or thought about this before, it's going to be like a slippery slope. But I'm trying to concretize it for you. If you've studied this before, maybe this is helping some things click a little bit, or maybe you know all this. And for those of you who know all of this, I apologize. So then we get to the question, then who carries the remaining, I have to underline remaining seeds of polluted karma when an Arya is in meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness. Remember a moment ago, our yogini, that's who we're talking about here again. Because once somebody reaches that stage, one becomes an Arya, but they still have remaining karmic formations or seeds or imprints. So then, what's the answer to that? Based on the conversation that we just had, one could hope that you could start to confidently answer that with just saying the mere I, but knowing what that really is. Um, so here, um, when and now we're going to start to understand and parse just a little bit the difference between um, the types of karma that we have in our mind stream as sentient beings, and why they say when you reach the path of seeing emptiness directly, you've cut off the root of karma. Well, then, if you've done that, how could there still be remaining karma or karmic seeds or karmic imprints? And where are they? Where do they reside? So this might get into sounding maybe like a bit of a academic or like a nerdy conversation, but it's kind of important and it helps us to understand like what we're working with when we're doing emptiness meditation on the path. So um, when someone, let me just see what's in the chat. Okay. Yeah. So Janet says maybe you could say impermanence is constant. I love the language thing because Linda brought up the point that, word problem, and Janet is like a good wordsmith. And one could think of it that way if it's helpful to understand that when we talk about impermanence of the I, that's existed since beginningless time, this general I, then, or the subtle mind and body as we think of it in Tantra, we can't think of it as something that isn't constant. It's changing. and it has the character of something that's impermanent and something that is not permanent. So I kind of like that, but that's just my opinion. Um, so anyway, and then and Claire says there is no there. Yeah, and then we can start doing recitation of the uh, of the perfection of wisdom and all kinds of texts from the masters like Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Jason Kappa that underscore that. Um, and do it in a less academic, nerdy way than I am tonight. But this is the best I can do. Um, so where, back to the question, where are the seeds carried um, when an Arya is reaches that state of seeing emptiness directly? We understand that they've uprooted karma, like they've ended karma by uprooting it at the root. So, and they're in meditative equipoise, and they're not in a state um, of their coarse body and mind um, functioning. They're beyond that. They're in a state of subtle body and mind. So, like what? So, where are these seeds? So, we're going to just parse that for a minute. So, Prasangika says that while karmic seeds accumulate um, on the mental continuum, the one that we carry from lifetime to lifetime that propel us in that general continuum to have further rebirths that are connected in some way. The mirror eye, now we know what that is also the carrier of karmic seeds. Remember, the mirror eye's presence is within the continuum, the general eye. Um, so that also carries karmic seeds, but we have to understand the difference between the two. We're going to get to that. So, although an Arya's mental consciousness directly realizing emptiness is unpolluted at that time in meditative equipoise, the mere eye is polluted because it's designated independence on both polluted and unpolluted aggregates. Um, and then this gets into talking about how you have to understand the emptiness of the aggregates. Um, and that's too much to get into right now, but it's a statement that I ask you to try to hold on to. So the mere eye in Prasangika philosophy says that it's suitable to carry these karmic seeds, meaning the mere eye, be they polluted or unpolluted. So in another way, Prasangika's posit that there are two, as I have on the screen there, two repositories of karmic seed, temporary, which are the ones that function and happen and occur during our individual lifetimes, during our particular eyes, um, and then the one that is carried, the mirror eye that carries um, the seeds on a constant. Janet, isn't that the word you just used? A constant basis. So, so there you go. There's the word constant. So, so this is something that you want to try to wrestle with. But if I threw this at you and I didn't describe for you like the context of the continuum of your eye, if you will, and then the parts or particular eyes that make that up in total and are possessed by that, if you will, but all of that being just merely designated independent arising, the idea of this two-tiered system might seem a little odd. Still might. Um, so one of the interesting things here is to understand that when someone is seeing in meditative equipoise is seeing emptiness directly, what is one eradicated? What is one uprooted? And that gets to understanding acquired afflictions. I should probably italicize that. and the ignorance that fuels it. So acquired afflictions are those seeds of karmic formation that have manifested and are resulting, and they are what can be uprooted from from their root, if you will, and basically be eradicated. This mind uh, is under the influence of ignorance. And once that's uprooted, that the unpolluted mind, meaning the mind of seeing emptiness directly, just manifests. And once that occurs, then it's just a matter of doing that kind of emptiness meditation, reaching that state over and over again. And that's part of what you do on the path of habituation, the path that occurs after the path of seeing. Um, that leads to understanding that the other type of karmic formations, or what are called innate afflictions and cognitive obscurations, these have not yet been eradicated. So these are the karmas that are the seeds. And here's the key word, latencies. They've yet to ripen, that are there, the karmic obscurations, as they're called, cognitive obscurations. So these are like very subtle forms of conceptual thinking that are eradicated on the path of habituation. They're connected to the 80 mental conceptions um, that one practices dissolving and during highest yoga tantra, which is part of how it's called the quick path. But that's another topic. Um, so the basis for those latencies, those seeds, um, are the is the mere I that carries those latencies. So this addresses the question of like, where are they located? And to cut to the chase and not be so nerdy and so detailish, those are called the innate afflictions. And you'll hear this in Buddhist philosophy, these two ways of parsing karma. It's kind of important to know that. But for our purposes, I think just understanding that the mere I has a presence that's constant, and it has a manifested contemporary aspect and a constant aspect. So then this is answers that question, at least from a Prasangika point of view. Um, so, uh, sorry, my phone just went off. So, just one other example I'll give you is one of a Shravaka Arya. A Shravaka Arya is one who's born at the peak of samsara. That's the highest division of the formless realm. But it's still a transmigrator samsara. So the mind of the peak of samsara is too subtle. It's too subtle to realize emptiness directly. So an Arya in that state has to actually descend to a coarser level of meditative absorption in the formless realm in order to see emptiness, experience emptiness, and meditate on emptiness, and then see it directly. But at the time he's in meditative equipoise on emptiness, his mental consciousness is unpolluted, just like a human. He has no other consciousness because beings in the formless realm don't have a body. They don't have sense consciousnesses like we do. Um, so there's no coarse mental consciousness, but there's still a transmigrator in samsara at that time. So says Prasangika. So that unpolluted mind um, uh, isn't a transmigrator, the one that's experiencing emptiness at that moment. But not all of the afflictive obscurations that transmigrator has have been eliminated. So we can't say that there isn't a transmigrator. So in this realm, a transmigrator at that peak of samsara is has the presence of those subtle obscurations, those afflictive obscurations, those innate afflictions present in its mere eye within its subtle body and mind continuum. Because even in the formless realm, um, all sentient beings have, according to highest yoga tantra, have a subtle body and mind. So I go too far with all of that. So that kind of covers what I wanted to cover, the two eyes, the mere eye, and then where karma resides in terms of its ability to function and there to be causes and conditions that eventually ripen karmic formations. This goes to the root of the first two links in the 12 links of dependent origination, right? So I'll stop here to see if anybody has any questions about my rambling that I did for the past 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. Anything that you want to bring up? Wes?
Yep. Thank you, John. Hopefully this one's quick. Just I guess you just trying to connect this back to I think one thing that you taught in the last class, and just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, um, is that for an Arya or an Arya and meditative equipoise on emptiness, the reason why they don't see the mere eye is because they're not looking at it, and not that the mere eye doesn't exist. Is that true? Is that correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Because with single pointed concentration, and take that literally, there's only one object that they're looking, one is looking at, never mind an aria, but one who's progressing towards that state where they could be in that deep meditative equipoise. You get in the habit over and over and over again of using one of these meditations on emptiness to single pointedly look at one object. And once you perfect being able to look at that one object, the object of negation, which I've said 100 times already during this course, that is what? Inherent existence. Does the object that you have under the object that you have and you're looking at what's designated in connection with it, is that designation in the sense, and when we talk about a self in the aggregates, we're talking about do those aggregates or the self have inherent self-existence? There's only one question. So once that's perfected, and what can arise then, where that's all that's being seen, meaning the lack of that appearing. We talked about that analogy to space, being something conceptually we can kind of wrestle with. Then we see that um, when the statement's been made, which I taught in the last session, that you can't see mere eye, conventional existing eye, when one is seeing emptiness directly because it's not an object of its focus, then one can start to see how that could be true. Because what's required in order to actually see emptiness directly is single point of concentration solely on that object. If anything else comes in to your mental horizon in any given moment, you lose it. That's why serenity, or what's called shamatha, or single point of concentration, is an essential ingredient alongside of insight, which is the actual analytical meditation.
So then is that why we call it a non-affirming negation? Because we are just looking at the lack of something without actually bringing something else to mind?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You
Okay.
should be teaching this course because that's perfectly said. That's why it's called the non-affirming negation,
Okay.
because
Okay,
otherwise
cool.
something else is going to arise. And if anything else arises, whatever conceptions that you have possibly in your mind stream, then you've lost the object of negation and you've lost the ability to eventually reach a point where you see what? The lack of inherent existence. And that is emptiness. And the longer you can hold it, then that can actually bring the inferential um, experience or realization of emptiness to your mind stream. And then it's not until much later that you can actually see emptiness directly, which is, you know, beyond our conversation tonight. But you hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll take the last part of our, any other questions or comments? I probably got a little nerdy there and I apologize because that can make people go like, oh. But it's all important to start to spend some time getting familiar with it and it becomes fluid. And then it starts to become clear and it starts to create the foundation for experiencing emptiness in meditation and not slip sliding backwards when you're just learning about these kinds of uh, teachings academically or like in a teaching. That's only the beginning, right? So as I mentioned, the antidotes, we're going to start to talk about the first one here in the last part of our session tonight. And that one is going to be Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning, which is one of the analytical meditations that are used to realize the selflessness of persons or the lack of inherent existence. Selflessness of persons is another code for lack of inherent existence. And the way Chandrakirti does this is okay, let's see. Question. Okay, so one of the questions is I fail to understand how a label, a name, can be a carrier or a container. So it's a good question. It really gets to probably one of the most difficult things to understand. Um, so uh, when we talk about a label or a name, it goes back to the wheel of life and the 12 links of dependent origination. In that, let me see if I can bring that up. Not sure if I have that up here. Let's see. Oh no. Oh yeah, maybe here. Yeah. So in this, let me close this window. Um, it goes to it's hard to see on the screen, but this first link here by Yama's jaw or teeth is ignorance, and then the second one is that leads to karmic formations, and then that leads to um, uh, two forms of consciousness: cause consciousness, where in one's mind stream, one has karmic imprints planted for the eventual effect or ripening energy that will then become the person's next rebirth. And then that leads to, and that's the fourth link here, that's called name and form. And it's called name and form because from the mental karmic ripening experience, karmic ripenings that are going on in your subtle mind and also your course level mind every single moment, they originate from the karmic imprints that have name and form. Name is something that appears in your mind in connection with one of the sense consciousnesses and your mental consciousness and turns into some kind of a form. So that may or may not make sense to you, but it's a subtle energy that originates by a conception that is we apply a name to karmically, mistakenly through our first two links of ignorance, then turned into karmic formations, and then that. manifesting as what we call name and form. It's like a one-two punch. And we experience that every single moment. Um, but we mistakenly, and I know that goes to that's my answer to your question, but I'm going to add to it by saying that we mistakenly conflate that with inherent existence, that things that because they have a mere name and manifest in a form, that they inherently exist. And so this is what is meant by that. It's not an ordinary name concept of a name. It's kind of this is the best I can do. And we can talk about that in more refined manner at another time, but that's the way I would approach it at this point. So when you use the word, especially in your question, carrier or container, it comes from the mind, your mind being a very subtle carrier via karmic formations that have been put there through your mind ignorantly experiencing objects arising to it that in a mistaken way. And then that just goes on and on. So if you study the wheel, the 12 links a little bit closer, you might see what I'm talking about, but especially the first four. And I tried to put that under the microscope a bit last session. So that's what I have to say about that, B. Another question in the chat was, how could you not get nerdy? Okay, that is the topic is nerdy. Yeah, you're right. It's inherently nerdy. That's great. Thanks, Nina. You're absolutely right. Let me go back though to here. So Chandrakirti uses a sevenfold reasoning process, and the reasoning process he applies is he uses it applied to an object. At the time, because at the time, the vehicle, it was a vehicle and it was a chariot. So, but here we're going to substitute car just to make it a little bit more contemporary. But at the same time, it can be applied to the self, just like a self, as I was talking about a moment ago with one of the earlier questions, is something we experience in relationship to the aggregates, which is its parts. But a car can be experienced the same way. You've got a car and you have its parts. So Chandrakirti has this sevenfold reasoning process. And the method itself proves no independent self exists, showing that the I is merely conventional and empty of inherent existence. And that frees us from suffering based on what hopefully you guys have watched or listened to the previous two courses. You can see how it ties all the way back to the Four Noble Truths. Um, but not so quick. Before we get into that meditation practice and any of the other ones we might do, like diamond slivers or dependent arising, you have to understand how reason and analyzing the ultimate actually works. You know what it does. It analyzes the object of negation, which is inherent existence. But the analysis needs to negate the existence of the conceived object of ignorance. This is what I was just talking about to B's question, how ignorance mistakenly perceives every single object that it interacts with. And that's why it's called a conceived object of ignorance. And we use something called probing awareness um, in reason analyzing the ultimate. How do I really exist? What are phenomena really? And so, quoting from the King of Concentration Sutra, although worldly persons cultivate concentration, they do not destroy worldly persons. Now we're talking about they do not destroy the notion of any inherently existing self. Afflictions return and disturb them as they did to Udraka, who cultivated concentration in this way. If you analytically discern the lack of self in phenomena, and if you cultivate that analysis in meditation, this will cause the result, the attainment of nirvana. There's no peace through any other means. So here he's talking about the importance of developing concentration, but if you don't apply it correctly, because there's lots of people who apply it to all kinds of objects, but if they don't apply it to the lack of self in phenomena, which is what we're talking about here with analyzing the car in Chandrakirti's sevenfold reasoning, then you're not going to end suffering. Um, so in this particular, by the way, he's talking about in this example, he's talking about um, one of the uh, one of the teachers of the Buddha, and that teacher uh, who taught the Buddha. I'm trying to find the uh, that he when he mentioned in there Udraka, he was one of the Buddha Siddhartha or Gautama Buddha's teachers, um, and he taught a form of meditation that had a very deep level of what's called meditative absorption. And it was so profound that it brought one to the peak of um, samsara, the most subtle place in samsara, the least affected by suffering in any way, shape, or form, but not completely. So it's a profound state of what's called samadhi, um, but it's still under the influences of ignorance and karma. That's why it's still part of samsara. So this wasn't good enough for the Buddha. And so then in the second verse, it kind of takes us where we need to go. Yeah, you need to have that concentration, but you need to apply it correctly. So the conclusion basically here is that along with this concentration, with Jason Kappa calls serenity, we need to develop sharp analytical wisdom, which is insight. That's what these meditations are about. And that's done through studying, doing reflection and initial meditation. Like move yourself gently into emptiness meditations. If you do it too quickly, you'll lose the proper object of negation. And then that leads, once you get really comfortable with all of this that I've been talking about the past 2.5 sessions, you can do further meditations, and that's when that can eventually lead to perceiving emptiness directly. So yeah, so that's what that's all about. Then I mentioned this earlier. Other thing you have to know very clearly is you need to know what the five aggregates are. I hope all of you know this, but it's form, feelings, discrimination, miscellaneous factors, and primary consciousness. So all of these are semi-self-explanatory, and I could give like a sentence or two about each, but I won't. If one of you need me to go back and do that before we wrap it up tonight, maybe we can, or the beginning of next session. Um, so here we get to the first step into what are we doing? So what we're doing is determining, investigating that besides being either identical to or completely distinct from the aggregates, and here when we're talking about a car, it's the car and its parts, same thing. There is no other possibility where a truly existent person could be found. Either has to be found either identical to or completely distinct from the aggregates. That's the only way it could inherently self-exist permanently without depending on something else. You have to have that clear in your mind. So there's baby steps, but we're taking the baby steps into clearly going at emptiness meditation, especially using reasoning the correct way. So we search and we find the answers to the following questions in this meditation. Is there any fault with saying the self is inherently one with the aggregates? Is there a problem saying it is inherently different from the aggregates? That's what we're investigating. That's what we're searching to find through the analytical portion of the meditation. And we won't go through these in any detail, but these are all part of what you need to come prepared to emptiness meditation with. These are called having the correct tools to conduct this investigation. You have to have a non-deceptive consciousness. You have to have a reliable cognizer. You have to have scriptural quotations. You have to be able to do analysis. You have to be able to think logically. You have to understand syllogisms. You have to understand refutations. And you have to have a genuine spirit of inquiry, should say a healthy attitude, not a health attitude, a healthy attitude of a certain type of skepticism without cynicism, an insatiable curiosity that wants, should be wants to know specifically, who am I? How do my body and mind exist? What is reality and what my sense and are what my senses perceive true? So this all goes to like, okay, I can function conventionally, but the way I'm experiencing things conventionally, is that how things really exist? Meaning inherently self-existing. But it's kind of important. This will be this will be circulated, at the website associated with this class, but you do need to, think through these at least. I could take an hour to go through just talking about each one of them. And then further, we won't go through this, but we kind of already gone through this. You need to utilize the five principal arguments that are present in all of these, in some iteration in each of these reasons analyzing the ultimate. Diamond slivers uses a certain way. Dependent arising, which is number four, uses a different way. And so there's five different arguments that have these different characteristics. Um, so a question that came up just now, without bodhicitta, is equipoise possible? Doesn't Vajrayana require this? So Vajrayana is the tantric path. Um, and not just my answer isn't just applicable to Vajrayana, but also to Sutrayana. In the Mahayana tradition, which Prasangika Mahayamika practitioners are part of, you need to successfully complete the path practices of either Sutrayana or Vajrayana. You have to have both bodhicitta and the wisdom of emptiness, and certainly one cannot realize emptiness directly without having bodhicitta. It's impossible. So then you can see emptiness directly in a fashion which gets into another discussion. If you're like a hearer or what's called a self-made Buddha, um, a solitary realizer, sorry. Um, and then the third variant of that is like being a bodhisattva. Those are three different paths. So one can talk about seeing emptiness, understanding emptiness, and even reaching the first bodhisattva bhuma if you're a hearer or a uh, um, self, a solitary realizer. So then these are for another discussion. But for us, in terms of what path we're practicing, we need to have both, especially Vajrayana. So, more specific to your question, Linda, yes, like definitively yes. Um, Otherwise, there's a blind spot that prevents you from getting there. This is a whole nother topic, just in terms of talking about it in any kind of detail. Um, and then just to finish up this evening before we stop, and then at the beginning of the next session, we'll go right into doing the meditation practice that I have prepared for tonight, but we don't have time. Um, you should be familiar with Tsongkhapa's four stages, a mental process of analyzing the ultimate, because they're connected to like what we're examining. When we're examining the object of negation, we're examining if the object exists inherently. We've covered that clearly. By doing this, we provide the absence of its inherent existence. This goes to what Wes was talking about a few moments ago. But then Jason Copper goes further. You would then examine if emptiness, meaning what you've discovered, is inherently existent. And then discovering that it isn't, you establish that that emptiness doesn't have inherent existence. And then, according to Jason Kappa, who's the founder of our lineage that we practice in at DNKL, then it's important to analyze through all four processes. This is what will get you further towards the realization, first inferential realization of emptiness, and then eventually the direct realization of emptiness. And then we add to that Nagarjuna's two um, should be objects, not objects of negation. Sorry about that. Ignorance. So this is the first link of the 12 links of dependent origination. It exists. It's a mind grasping at true existence. That's what we were just talking about before, the bees question. This is the root of samsara, suffering existence. It cannot be refuted, but it can be counteracted. So that's why we do the path practices in Vajrayana and also Sutrayana. There's differences between path practice and reason practices. Reason practices, like we're doing here with these meditations on emptiness, don't deal with existing things like um, the qualities of bodhicitta and permanence. These are existence, things that exist. Inherent existence, the second of the negations here, doesn't exist. This is the object apprehended by that grasping, meaning the grasping mind at something truly existent. It doesn't exist at all. This is what is refuted by probing awareness, doing reasoned analyzing the ultimate. So you've heard me say it 4 or 5 different ways over the last 3 sessions, but you need to get that very clearly in your mind. Otherwise, you can start to conflate what exists and what doesn't exist, a mere I and inherent existence. This is very, it's not dangerous, but it could really, make your meditation not really have the intended effect. So we then are going to move. I'm going to end it here, but I'm going to read the verse. Uh, so went through all those tools. I didn't reference my pages, so I have a lot of pages to skip over. Mhm. So the last thing I'll say about this before we go to the verse, because then we have to wrap it up in a minute. Um, it's a gradual process that occurs. This whole thing of using reason, analyzing the ultimate. It first is got to be done gently and slowly without letting the um, points that are being meditated on let you go down a rabbit hole. So you're going to see that the first meditation that we do is one that takes us gently down um, that path. And it's going to be built on a verse that it comes from, let's see, I have to find this now. So it comes from this verse that, and we're going to leave it here, but I just want to at least read it to you. This was one of the first kind of gentle ways to get into analytical meditation in terms of sevenfold reasoning that comes from the sutras. So it comes directly from the Buddha. So one of the Buddha's disciples, Bhikshuni Vajrayana, was meditating in a grove. And Mara, the personification of self-grasping, I mean, most of us know Mara as kind of like the devil, but it's self-grasping. That's what Mara is. Um, Sought to disturb her meditation by asking a question about an external creator. And recognizing the speaker as the troublemaker, Mara, she replied in this way: Self is a demonic mind. You have a wrong view. These conditioned aggregates are empty. There's no living being in them. Just as the word, she used the word chariot, but I put the word car in there, is used in dependence on a collection of parts. So when the aggregates exist, when they exist, parenthetically, hopefully you could put in your mind conventionally with a mere eye, there is a conversion. Conversion, though, that's not the right word. I probably didn't type that right. There is a convention. A convention. Um, there is the convention. That should say can. Let me correct that. There is a convention, a living being in dependence upon the aggregates. So this is going to be our first meditation that we use. We're going to use these two verses and we're going to bring them into focus and meditate on them. And it's like a first baby step in terms of addressing those two ways of how um, something can inherently exist either as something that is the same as its parts or separate from its parts and completely different from its parts. So we're going to have to end it there because we ran out of time, but I did the best I could with the time. I felt it was important before we got to actually doing one of these meditations that we really put a more solid foundation under our feet in terms of understanding the principles of what we stand on and the concepts in which we use and let be present in our mind as we undertake these meditations. So it's almost it is past the time, but if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take one or two short questions or brief questions. Anybody have any questions besides the ones that were already asked? Okay,
If,
so
if no one else has one, I guess I have another that I've been
yeah,
thinking
go
about.
ahead, Wes. Yeah.
So I guess, and maybe this might tie back to just like, need more direct experience of the actual fruits of these meditations. But like when it kind of seems like if we have this lack of an inherent existence, but it still allows for a mere eye and a mere eye that can still function and can still carry karmic seeds and still the activities of the world can still occur. How is that exactly liberating? Because or liberating from suffering? Because in the sense that, like, when you still have things that can perform function, there still leaves room for, like, needing to be attached to things that progress you through the path, for example, like attachment to producing virtue, and then aversion towards producing non-virtue. So there's still that sort of attraction and aversion there. You know, yeah, I'm sure I'm having trouble with
No,
understanding what exactly.
your question's clear. It's like, how does this help alleviate suffering existence? If there's a functioning conventional self and I that arises dependently with things in samsaric existence. You can also say, well, we won't say it, but so that's what you're asking. And so it's by the experience of first understanding how things exist and don't exist. And then as you get deeper into these meditations, you start to have realizations of them and then they that starts to change what's in your mind stream. And then as you actually are interacting, we're talking about moment by moment in your days and weeks and hours and uh, that go beyond your meditative practice. Um, it starts you start to ex you start to counteract the ripening factors that are constantly normally moving through your mind, which are the ones that are based on ignorance, because you're starting to spend time with moving out of your mind stream that ignorance. And so um, ultimately, when you get to where you finally see emptiness directly, then you know definitively and without any further misunderstanding or reality, even when you go out of meditative equipoise, that 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 you no longer um, conduct yourself in a way through the lens of ignorance. You've then broken the link of ignorance, and therefore karmic formations can no longer occur. And everything building up to that is a process of getting there. So you slowly improve. And in Tantra, you can do it very quickly, but Sutrayana path, it's slower, but it's still moving you in the direction where to your question, the quality of your life changes because your experience of life changes. You stop ignorantly and mistakenly experiencing how things arise. The less you see things as inherently self-existing, the more it loses its grasp on you. Inherent self-existence is ignorance, and ignorance is self-grasping, even though it's separate in terms of like when we identified the three poisons. They're really synonymous. They go hand in hand, one without the other. So it's very visceral, it's very tangible in terms of like what starts to occur. Even on the course level of living a life the way you're living it as Wes and I'm living it as John, this is what happens. And then on an ultimate level, you eventually can reach Buddhahood, and suffering permanently. So does that help at all? Because I know that we've talked about this a few times now.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. I definitely need to like, mull over it a bit more, but I think it's a good jumping off point, I guess.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And thanks for everybody hanging in there through my nerdy conversation. But it's very, very important. And next week we're going to practice the meditation connected to the Buddha's student, and then we're going to move from there right into how it looks, meaning the seven parts of the sevenfold reasoning and how to utilize all seven of them um, in meditation. And hopefully that will help send us on our way at the end of the series, at the end of next week, into being able to go away from this four-part series where you can actually, you know, do a practice properly on emptiness. And it can be applied then to also the other types of emptiness meditations that use the same process, reason, analysis of the ultimate. So enough. We'll end it there.